Here we go. Okay, welcome, Guy Godfrey, award-winning cinematographer, and currently, tell us where you are.
Uh, wow, thank you for having me. I'm in Los Angeles, California right now, doing a project here for a few months. One of three that I've done this year. The other two were in Canada. So that's it's been a bit of a busy year for me. But yeah, thank you for having me.
Oh yeah, pleasure. You were just recently working with the director-actor who is known for his part, I think, in True Blood. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did. I started this year. I was sort of fortunate to be asked to do a film that we shot in Toronto in the winter, which is cold and dark, but very appropriate for sort of this story, with Stephen Moyer and Anna Paquin and Suresh Larkin and Mark Larkin's company, which is a company based out of California, but we made this film in Canada in January, February. So sort of it was a good way to start the year with a good group of people and a great cast of people. That film is really it's a interesting sort of family. It's a family road trip movie. Think of taking a road trip when you were kids, and now it's sort of you're all grown adults, and you have to take this road trip, and it's sort of sentimental, but also a very sad trip because you're dealing with some family issues. And but we had a great cast of people. Ed Asner was in it, Melissa Leo, Cynthia Nixon, Rhys Ifans, Dennis O'Hare. It was a really wonderful way to start the year for me, actually. A nice small movie and something quite, I think, sort of an important story to tell as well.
And is there anything that you would say that informed you about the look of the film when you read the script?
Yeah, well, as I said, it's sort of a dramatic film. It's about a family who are going to have to take a trip together by car to sort of deal with the aftermath of one of their siblings passing away. And so, but they're a cast of quirky characters, and it's kind of there's a lot of dialogue and chatting and stuff like that. So there's a sort of a humor and also sort of drama to the story, which I think is good. It's like that whole Mary Poppins thing, a spoonful of sugar with the medicine, and not that it's medicine, but it's that one with the other gives you one is just as effective as the other. So you laugh a little bit, you cry a little bit. That classic, drama. The two masks. But how I informed the look was I worked with Stephen Moyer, who is the director on the film, as you mentioned, and we had a few references for things, and we wanted to make it feel, real. I think that's a lot of things that I do now. Is my whole attempt is to try and make a film feel realistic. If you look at some of the bigger movies out there, and that's important for them to be sort of movie-ish and polished up, but what I like to, the movies that I like to see and the ones that I like to watch are the ones that feel realistic. They don't feel as though the filmmakers were there. Just as much as I like to go to a big blockbuster movie and just have a good time and take that ride as well. But for this film, it was much more about being able to drop into these characters and kind of, in a way, almost forget that you're being sort of shown through the movie, and that you can just sort of relate to the material. So I think that's how we mostly approached it. Was very sort of loose and handheld and intimate with these characters as they're going through it. So that was it. I think it was a successful thing for us, or at least I feel as though we didn't get in the way of the performances, which is important.
And there was a film that you were working on in Canada called Glow, right?
Yeah, so then also this year, the project just before this was a film with a director from Vancouver, Keith Pearman, and some producers from Canada as well. Alison Black was the sort of key point producer on that. And Alison's movie from a few years ago, Mean Dreams, had done quite well with Nathan Orlando. And so, Alison had put this project together with Keith and had been working for quite some time. And this one's a sort of different stories about sort of teenagers and adolescence and the excitement of being a teenager and what that means in today's kind of world about. This one wasn't about gender fluidity, but it was more about sort of sexuality and that kind of stuff. So it was, again, another film that, my approach, your sort of jumping off point is to, if you're trying to make something that is, at least I think, sort of meaningful and intimate to these characters, it's trying to make it sort of feel real and accessible, but also interesting and beautiful, not just sort of raw, but it has a sort of certain romance to it. And Keith was very set on it having this great sort of ride where you had sort of an excitement to the film. So we sort of really tried to influence that. So that was my sort of, I guess you would call, summer project before this one, which is my fall project. So it's been a busy year. That film, Giant Little Ones, probably will be out and about on the scene, festivals and what have you. I think by the new year, maybe spring or something like that. We'll see.
Okay, so we can look out for it. Giant Little Ones.
Yeah.
And it's GLO. And then recently, Suck It Up it just played at the St. John's Film Festival, International Women's Film Festival.
Women's Film Festival, yeah. Yeah, Suck It Up was a film I did last year, which with a really great group of people from kind of all over the country. We shot in the Rockies, just outside of Banff, in a little town called Invermere. Based ourselves out of Calgary. A couple of maritime Nova Scotian producers, which is where I'm from originally. And then Jordan Canning, the director, from Newfoundland, and the cast, who are from all over the country, really. So, yeah, we made this tiny little film for a couple months in the Rockies, and it's just come out on the scene. So I think it's going to be in theaters this fall, so I would definitely recommend it. And I think I sort of just really like the film. As a film, it's sort of a fun kind of Thelma and Louise style story about two sort of best friends who are trying to sort of cope with some grief and loss. But it's funny, it's snappy, it's very well written by a woman named Julia Hawke. She's from California. Or she lives in California. That film sort of done its sort of course of film festivals, and I think it's been well received. Did sort of Slamdance in Park City this winter, and then it's done Calgary and Vancouver and Halifax and now St. John's, and so it'll carry on doing that. But I think it's set to do a theater release in Canada this fall. I'd have to check the dates on that though, but I would definitely look out for it. It's a lot of, it's a good film because it's sort of proudly Canadian in a way. And I don't mean overtly, I don't mean it's sort of Canadian. It's just, it's not trying to be, sometimes you make movies and then people think, okay, well, we'll just make it generic anywhere. We don't want to say where it is. And this film is set where we shot it. It's about these people who are Canadian, and that's it. We're not trying to hide that or push that. So there's something nice about that. I think that's important. Is why do we associate so much value on trying to make it a nowhere film or specifically American style film, or maybe it's American, maybe it's not. And I think that's a nice thing to do, especially in the Canadian film industry, because I think it's important to have that kind of confidence about it.
Is there something particular that grabbed you when you read the script to make you say, oh, I want to work on this?
Well, with that script, Suck It Up, it was, I think it was that it felt as though it had a contribution. My idea of movies and the movies I like to watch, or the movies I think at least have a value, as I've said, sometimes you just want to go to a 2-hour smash 'em up Fast and the Furious movie. But that's sort of unrealistic. But sometimes, what I like is a movie that's going to, contribute somehow. Not sort of preach, but will contribute to humans and society and that kind of thing. And I'm talking in very small amounts, So that film was nice because it was dealing with two girls in their early 20s coping with the loss of a family member, at a very young age, which is not something you're necessarily used to at any point in your life. And so, it dealt with that kind of subject matter. And so I was attracted to that because, again, it was the opportunity to make a film that was about an experience that had an intimacy and that was speaking about something that is sort of universal. And we don't always know how to cope or get through or handle. And I think that's interesting. And I don't think, in this case, I don't think it needs to be heady, and I don't think it needs to be overly intellectual, because this is, it's this sort of drinking and swearing. It's very loose filmmaking, but at the end of the day, there's a heart to it, and I think that's a film sort of worth making, and I think it's a film worth watching because you can kind of relax a little bit, and you don't have to think too hard. But the message is kind of there for you to understand, and so I call it, it's a good experience. I think filmmaking is kind of nice when it's an experience. When you come out and you're not totally. I mean, again, you can be totally fine and whatever, but you come out and you're sort of thinking about it a little bit, and you think about it, once, great, that's a success. Maybe you think about it for days or weeks, or you have a debate, and so that's the kind of film. As a cameraman, it seems odd maybe to talk about that, but I think it's pretty universal for most of us camera people, that we want to sort of contribute to the filmmaking as filmmaking and not just take pictures.
Yeah, you have a part in telling the story. You're integral into because there's such a huge team behind filmmaking that sometimes we don't realize the cinematographer is even there, which is probably means that you're doing your job.
Yeah.
And another great Canadian story, Maudie, that you worked on.
Yeah, that is sort of an incredible film as well. I think even standing from where I stood on the inside and then now being able to sort of stand on the outside and look at it, it's managed to be seen, and people have really responded well to it, and that's quite touching to realize that people see what it is you do and they have such a reaction, for good or for bad. I think it's nice to have the film play and have people enjoy it and remark about it. It's I think it's very nice for that to happen. But Maudie, that's another interesting story. My approach for that was, it's a Canadian film. It's about a Nova Scotian folk artist that I remember from growing up, not in person because she had passed away before I was born, but I remember the efforts to sort of salvage her house and put it in the museum. In her house, that house in the film, the little house, stands as one of her life's works in the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia in Halifax, which is worth if you're ever in Halifax going to see, because it's remarkable. I mean, I think it sort of has more of an impact for you to stand in front of that house than seeing it in the film, because the film's in the house and you sort of realize that, but the house is really quite something.
And you shot in the actual house, or did you have a replica?
No. We
Okay.
had to recreate it.
Okay.
Yeah. We sort of cheated a little bit and made it just incrementally slightly larger so that we could put a crew of camera men and women inside of it to do it, and we also just it's a work of art, so we wouldn't be able to nearly go near it. So we recreated it when we shot the film. Again, that film, the approach to that was to try and make a film that was not sort of glamorous. For me, it felt like a betrayal of this woman's very humble and true life story for us to make a show of it or be too filmmakerish, So my work on that as a cameraman was very subtle and tried to be very unobtrusive and just allow it to be an experience that represented what I felt was the point of the story, was this very humble and simple and impoverished life that this woman led, but had such a twinkle because of it. And so, it was important for me to allow that to be the special part, and for my work to not push it away, but to not sort of polish it up too much. So I feel, I haven't seen the film in a while, but I feel as though I hopefully accomplished that, and I feel as though that's the case. I think people really take to Sally Hawkins' performance. I think Ethan Hawke as well, who's in the film, that people sort of, they sort of really gain access, and they feel what those two characters go through and express without my work getting in the way. So that's always the important part for me.
And for anyone who might not know who Maudie is, do you want to give us a little?
Oh, Maudie, yeah, of course.
Because maybe they haven't heard.
So the true life Canadian folk artist, Maud Lewis, who was born and raised in Digby County, Nova Scotia, in the early part of the 20th century, 1900s. And the movie takes place from 1936 to 1967, I believe. And Maud Lewis was this quiet little. She had arthritis. She was quiet lady who painted folk art on pieces of wood that her husband would cut her from boards in the backyard, and she would paint these very childlike paintings and sell them for $5 on the side of the road in front of her house. And she became world renowned at the time, and so that was sort of a remarkable, small, simple story that had this sort of much broader impact throughout the world. And she painted these very childlike paintings that had this. It's interesting, when we were making the film, preparing the film, the art department had to come up with these paintings, and we weren't necessarily allowed to. We couldn't take them from the art gallery, so we had to paint our own. So copying them, or also then generating their own. Funny enough, even though they're childlike paintings, and you should look it up, the art department really struggled to make them look anywhere near the way she made them look. There's something so personal about the way she painted them that it was really fascinating to sort of see that it was much, much harder to do what people thought a child could do.
And she had a particular style that was
very specific style. Even though it was very basic and plain, it's not. I mean, a lot of people often said, "Oh, my kid could paint like this." Well, I mean, we had a team of 3 or 4 art department people who got it eventually, absolutely, but at first tried a few times and went, "Oh, this is much harder than we expected it would be."
Now, in terms of that kind of philosophy, would you say that there's something that you could connect your films? Like, is there a certain Guy Godfrey style? Or is there something?
I mean, as I sort of said it out loud just now, I guess in a way that would be the idea. Is that my idea is to approach things from the sort of simplest viewpoint, so that, as I said, what's in front of the camera, what's happening is important, and so that it is felt. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's very simple on my end, but it shouldn't be complicated to receive it, is maybe more of an accurate way for me to say it. So, and this is obviously an evolution of how I think and work, but it'll be different next year.
Well, sometimes simplest is the hardest to achieve, like you were just saying.
Yeah.
Like, it's difficult. And you've done a lot of shorts too, so like how is that something that you find helps inform your work, and like what's your, you must enjoy doing shorts, because
well, I enjoy doing this work. Short films are often a way for people to get a start in the film business, because it's a little lower overhead, a little less commitment or time commitment. Excuse me. For me, there's something exciting about the short form narrative that is interesting. Again, in my opinion, it should be somewhat simple, or at least concise, and not overly complicated. So I enjoy doing short films. I have done a number of them. I'm fairly sort of specific about which ones I choose to do now, because I'm much busier in my schedule in the last few years. I think they're a great place to try things out. Everybody always says this, great place to take risks and try things out. I guess in a way, I would hope that, because there's so many great short films made around the world and in Canada, I sort of wish sometimes we would take those kind of risks in longer format movies, because I think once we get to bigger stuff, we often go, okay, well, we better be a little bit more cautious here. This is a bigger investment, or this is a bigger time, or I don't know if it's going to work across the span of 95 minutes. And I wish we'd kind of would allow that idea to go away and try and make longer films the way we make short films, because I think short films take risks and they push boundaries, and that's kind of what I'm getting at by saying, a contribution to some kind of dialogue or conversation. So, yeah, that's. I can't remember the last short film I did. Oh, I did a film last year with Molly Parker, director. She's an actress. I think she's in House of Cards, and she's a Canadian actress. Anyway, she wrote and directed this short film last year that we shot about a year ago now, and did a little bit of the film festival this year. And we really sort of dove into it visually, and it's. We took some risks, and whether they succeeded or not, it's hard for us to say on the inside. But it was challenging on a short term to do. So that was nice.
I guess you're always learning, right? In each scenario, you're always pushing the boundaries and.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, you should always be open to learning, because it will always change. You never want to get left behind. It is. And again, I said there's a challenge to the short narrative, how to make something engaging and feel satisfying or complete. It doesn't need to necessarily resolve in a short film, but it can't feel bigger than what you are telling, but it can't feel, it has to feel sort of satisfying, sort of short films. So I think they're a wonderful, wonderful part of this, of filmmaking, short films. So,
yeah. And there was a really fun film, Wet Bum, that I remember came out in 2014 that you were a part of. That.
Yeah, Wet Bum, 2014. It's so funny. That seems so far away, but it is fairly recent. Well, anyway. Wet Bum, another great sort of small Canadian feature film, written and directed by Lindsay McKay, who's from St. Mary's, Ontario. And I met Lindsay in Los Angeles here a few years before that, in 2009, because she and I both attended the same film school, the American Film Institute Conservatory. And so this was her first feature at the time, and it's another small, sort of quiet little story, about sort of coming of age story about a young girl in a small town, sort of, navigating that sort of 15, 16-year-old sort of coming of age time. That film it played a few festivals and did very well. Has a short release in Canada.
And there was a lot of underwater stuff happening, right? That you had to.
Yeah, well, so in the story, the young girl, it's called Wet Bum, and so she has swimming lessons. She goes to school, and she's bullied a little bit, and she takes swimming lessons, and then she goes to work because because she's gotten in trouble by her mother. She's sort of forced to take a job where her mother works at the sort of retirement home, helping sort of clean rooms and what have you, as a sort of punishment in a way, I guess. And so, but she's sort of a quiet, awkward girl, and she kind of refuses to change out of her bathing suit in the changing room after swim class, so she just puts her clothes on, and therefore when she goes to work, her bum is wet. So that's the genesis of the title, in a way, but it's sort of the movie is sort of about that awkwardness and deals a little bit with what it's like to be a sort of awkward young teenager in a small town. And I think most people can relate to that from one side or the other, whether you were or you weren't. And so there was something about that was... So yeah, we had a lot of underwater stuff because in a way the storytelling there was about the underwater material being a place where she felt more herself, or at least, I don't want to say safe, but it was her sort of her own little world that was separate, and as you know, being underwater, the sound changes and view changes and that kind of stuff. So we did quite a bit of underwater stuff. Well, quite a bit, few number of scenes, because that was important to portraying that idea.
Was there a time that somebody taught you some sort of trick for working camera that was like either a lighting thing or some sort of technical thing that anyone who's watching who loves cinematography would go, oh, that's a cool thing?
Yeah,
I'm sure there's lots, but
there's lots of specific things and weird little things I could sort of come up with, I'm sure, that would mean sort of nothing except for maybe a handful of people. But technical stuff. I mean, I think it's sort of tricks. And you had prepared me for this question. I sort of drew a blank when you mentioned it before, and I'm still drawing a blank on it. But I think it's I mean, the main thing I always think about, and it kind of relates to what it is that I do or try to do, is that probably shouldn't recommend this as a trick.
Don't do this at home.
But yeah, I mean, it's like, I have a certain cavalier confidence about things like this. But no, it's that the camera, I think the camera needs to go where it needs to go. And so whether that means nearly underwater, nearly at the surface of the water, over the edge of something, it might seem dangerous, but if we're too, if it's got to go there to get what we're talking about, then it's got to go there. I think I learned that from my friend Ben, is that it's like, just get into it, and I think if you're too safe about where you put the camera and the way you look at things, you might be missing it. Mm-hmm. A lot of times I'll be doing something, there's a scene in Suck It Up where the two girls are swimming in the lake, and they're swimming in the lake, and so what's the way to do that? Well, I just put my bathing suit on, I ran into the water with them, and there I am, at the surface of the water with this camera, which is, to a lot of people, very expensive. And of course we protected it,
right.
Put some stuff on it, so it's not blatant, but if it's got to go there, it's got to go there, and don't have any. You got to be watching this picture and following that, rather than thinking about what this box is doing or where to go with it. I think the more interesting stuff you get is the stuff that you respond to what you're seeing, rather than think about what it is you're supposed to do otherwise. So I guess that's my sort of.
So it's
lost the idea of a trick.
You're like, just get in there and no limitations, basically.
Yeah, no limitations. I think sort of sometimes we write too many rules for ourselves and say, okay, well, the camera will only do this or only do that. I think sometimes that gets in the way of actually responding to material. I work in the way that my work is in response to what is happening in front of the camera, and right. That's the way I can function. That's the way I do it. That's my function. And rather than having it come to me, So I'm just sort of that's like I said, I'll be different next year.
Right.
Right now, this is the evolution of me.
All right. Well, we'll have to check back in next year and see how things have evolved.
Yeah, I'll come up with something else. Hey, here are the rules, guys. This is how we do it.
And I guess, like, looking back, you could probably see how you've evolved in terms of when you've started out.
Definitely. I mean, I think that's something that each film for me is in response to the one before it. So I do have my style and I do have my approach, but each film is unique. But you can't eliminate the fact that I am who I am, and the version of me I am now is how this project I'm on now.
Right.
I'm doing things on this project in terms of the visuals of it that are in response to how I did the last film, and then that one was in response to the one. So there's an evolution for sure, and I think I sort of learned that working with Lindsay McKay on Wet Bum. You know, there's a lot of I sort of moved into a different headspace working with her because she's got this kind of approach, and she's not just satisfied enough that there's pictures on the screen, but it needs to mean something more.
Right.
And so, you know, that's kind of the evolutions where it started, and now it's just been tumbling. So, yeah, every film, you know, if I was to shoot Maudie now,
Right.
I think it would be different. I mean, it'd be probably very much the same to most people, but I would do it an entirely different way. And not to say that the way it's done is wrong at all. I think it's very right. But I think the interesting thing, there's an interesting thing to talk about in terms of filmmaking altogether is that
Right.
It's a version of whoever makes the film in that group, and that's how they did it, and now it's set. But if you were to do it again years later, it would be a slightly different version. And probably very much the same, but it would be different somehow for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing about films is, and I was thinking about talking about this the other day with some people here, was that a film is interesting that you've made it, and it comes out, and let's say a film I watched as a kid, and you watch it one way. For instance, When Harry Met Sally,
Right.
which is kind of a reference in a way to a film that I'm doing now in California. When I watched it as a kid, it's one film. When you watch it as a sort of young adult, it's another film. And then you watch it again, it's the same film, but the viewpoint is so fascinating to think about that it's been locked in time, but it still means certain things and still relate to it in a certain way with the nostalgia of having seen it before and the viewpoint that it's not antiquated, but it's of a time.
Right.
And you are now in this time. So I think that's really interesting about films, and it's why it's interesting to watch films that you really enjoyed throughout your life again years later. I think it's a really interesting thing to do.
Right.
Because
it's like reading an old diary.
Yeah, exactly. The film hasn't changed. You've changed.
Right.
And isn't that interesting? So,
that is a
yeah, those are the kind of things you think about. I'm a camera guy. But those are the things you think about, like,
right.
You know, how do people see this, and how do they experience it? And you're trying to figure out, you know, those thousands and thousands of viewpoints and how to convey the way you feel it, about it. And then it's fascinating to see how people respond to it. That's why I said it was really interesting to see how people responded to Maudie, because I didn't expect any of that when we made it. We were just trying to make it for what it was. And then it's fascinating to see where people laugh and where people cry. It's different than what you thought it was going to be, and how people thought about one way or the other, because you're so inside of it. So I think it's a very interesting thing about filmmaking in general.
Is there something specific, like, are there certain comments that people told you about that film that stood out for you? Because the way you spoke about it seemed like you heard some interesting feedback that you just weren't really expecting. Or was it just the audience response that you were talking about?
I think it's mostly just been the audience response. I don't think it's as brash as I thought it was going to be funny and everybody thinks it's sad. I think we knew what it was going to be. We were intending to make it a sort of heartfelt, subtle, intimate piece. It was just nice to sort of see that people respond to it so broadly and from different parts of the world. I think that's what I'm sort of saying. But, and a lot of times you don't know. It's sort of, you don't know whether a film is going to be successful or not.
Right.
I don't think you should hope either way. I think you just have to make a good film, and then what it will do, what will be.
Totally.
So, yeah, that's my cinematographer viewpoint, my philosophies, I guess.
Okay, well, I think we covered a lot of good ground. And it sounds like, yeah, we have to follow the evolution of your philosophy.
Just one other thing I was thinking about. That whole thing about talking about viewpoints of film and how the things. That's why I think it's nice to see films in the cinema. Because you have so for instance I've movies that I've made, and you sit in different rooms, and you see it a number of times, which isn't necessarily common, but I've in different parts of the world. Suck It Up as an example. In Halifax, in Calgary, in Park City, where it's played so far, and people have different reactions, and I think that's fascinating because it's all about this room that you're in. You have it contributes to the experience, for good or for bad, probably. But that's I think the difference than necessarily watching at home on your own or being safely on your couch. I think going somewhere and having this experience, and then, to be honest, I think one of the most interesting things about cinema viewing experience is from the credits, standing up and walking out into the world.
Right.
Do you know that moment? Because you're either like, that movie was terrible, or you're like, well, that was good, or you don't know yet. Oftentimes, I don't know. I don't know yet. And it takes that walk to somewhere, and then you meet some other people, and then you kind of dawns on you later. You go, oh, that's how I felt about it. So I think that's interesting. I think that's the sort of interesting value of going to a movie. Again, to use this phrase, as an experience. And so my contribution to that, because it's obviously somewhat of a visual medium as well as a sonic or an audio experience and a lot of other things, I think that's what's fascinating to me, is that you're making something for a lot of people to watch in a group as a film, and what that means.
Do you think, because it seems like less and less people go to the cinema these days, do you think that's
well, I don't know the numbers on it. Yes, I think cinemas are having to sort of work it out slightly differently because there's so much more access otherwise for people, which is easier. And in a lot of ways also entirely different. Watching 8 episodes of a show, you would never go to the cinema and watch 8 episodes of something.
Right.
So the film medium as an experience is a sort of short. I mean, it's funny talking about short films. If we talk about the range of things, short film is a short film, generally like less than 20 minutes.
Right.
And a feature film is a feature film, which is, I think, meant to be over 75 or 80 minutes. I can't remember the number. But now, with TV shows, we're talking about storylines over 8 hours, or 8 1-hour episodes. So it's just these sort of
it's like they're mini movies almost.
A film now is sort of a short narrative, a feature. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting too. I mean, you could start to think about how feature film is a shorter version of what you can get out of a TV show, and the simplicity of that. Mm-hmm. So I think people less and less are going to the movies for sure, but I don't think it's anything that's going to go away, because I think it's fascinating on its own.
Yeah, that overview that you said, like each film in a different place had a different essence almost that came out from it. That's a really interesting sort of perspective that you would have because you traveled with the film, right?
Yeah, it's in different rooms and viewing with people you don't know. I mean, sometimes it can be bad. I mean, but a lot of times it's interesting because I saw a movie last 2 or 3 weeks ago. I was in Calgary for the Suck It Up premiere, or not premiere, but the gala at the Calgary International Film Festival. And friends of mine had made a film called Low Life, which is these friends of mine from California. And it's kind of, to some, I would say, it would feel like an aggressive kind of genre film. So I sat in the cinema, and it's kind of gory, and it's a little bit it's a lot dark in terms of a sense of humor.
Okay.
And it was a room full of people, and it was an afternoon screening, which is odd for a film with this kind of genre.
Right.
And it's not odd, but it wasn't like this kind of film. I think was going to be programmed for the late night underground film festival, but the Calgary programmers felt it was sort of strong, and so they put it in the main international festival. At any rate, my point is, by being in the room with a bunch of other people, about 30 minutes into the film, you sort of go, oh, I don't know. This movie is, I don't know if it's bad or you're just unsure. You're like, oh, that's a bit rocky. And then somebody laughed at something that was sort of overtly kind of gory and kind of absurd. Somebody laughed. And then everybody in the room had permission to laugh. And then it changed everything. And so then the rest of the film was this hilarious but gory genre film, this ride that rode out and then tied itself together. And at the end was very satisfying and kind of like unbelievable and strong in all these kinds of ways. But it took being in a room with some other people and for someone to just kind of break that. And it kind of was like a communication of saying, hey, here's permission to laugh at this and not laugh at it, but kind of like enjoy it in this way. And that was important. So I think that's something that's fascinating about being in the room and watching people on a big screen in the dark, and you don't know who any of these people are, but you've all experienced this thing at the same time. That I think is really fascinating.
Yeah, I've been in a cinema where myself and my brother were the only people laughing. It was like very interesting to see that how people respond anyway. But what I think you mentioned that's most interesting is that, everyone's experience, so your experience is projected onto that screen, but it's a collaboration of everyone else on the film, and then the audience has an experience that also impacts. So it's like this full collaborative being that ends up happening.
Sure. And it can work and not work in a lot of ways for all that stuff. But that's why I think it's interesting, and that's what you sort of are working towards.
Totally.
Experience. Most recently. Anyway.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us on a Saturday, which is your day off.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll have to do a sequel to the evolution and see where you're at in the future.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. Cheers.
Okay.